The last day of summer, Chapter 9. Nedral Noser Fit. Otto could not face the golden hours without feeling guilty, so he focused on the dozen or so hand mirrors levitating just beyond AM and PM. Desperately wanting to change the subject, he said, "Why were you screaming at those mirrors?" The beaming smiles on their faces thinned into straight lines. "Because," AM said, "they are so unflattering." She'd stepped past them, grabbed the handle of the closest mirror. It was small enough that it unstuck immediately. "Please be careful with the mirrors," Mrs. Nedral pleaded. She twisted and turned the mirror, stuck out its tongue, and pricked his fro. He thought he looked fine. "I don't get it." He turned the mirror around so AM and PM could see the glass. "No!" they shouted. Their sudden scream startled Sheed, and he dropped the hand mirror. It smacked the ground face down, a small thundercrack. Mrs. Nedral wheezed. "7 years bad luck," Otto said. "Oh, boy." Mrs. Nedral's voice trembled. "It's quite a bit worse than that." No one really paid attention to Mrs. Nedral because the golden hours were making so much noise with her whimpering and despair. Otto followed Sheed's example and grabbed another hand mirror from the air, positioning it so he could see what AM and PM saw. "No!" they screamed. Otto said, "There's really nothing wrong with how you look, you know." Mrs. Nedral said, "Boys," AM refused to peek at the mirror, "this mid-morning light is terrible for us. My pores." "Boys," said Miss Nedral. PM recoiled. "You can barely detect the definition in my cheekbones." "Boys, eyes on me right now." All heads turned. "Don't make any sudden movements. Very slowly, very carefully, I want one of you to pick up that mirror you dropped, then place it under the water in the fountain." The fountain she spoke of rested in the center of the green space and was also frozen. Its shimmering water spouts looked more like fancy glass sculptures than liquid. Since he and Otto could unstick small things from the time freeze, she'd supposed he could put the mirror under the fountain's surface. Water was just a bunch of tiny drops put together. But why? "Is there a reason, Miss Nedral?" he asked. "Because water can also be a mirror. I'm sure you've looked at your reflection in a pond, or even that very fountain. So if you hurry, we can use the water in the fountain as a cage until we figure out something else." Otto wondered if he'd misheard her. "It sounds like you said something about a cage." "I did." Sheed's face puckered. "Why you need a cage?" "Because tranquilizer darts won't work on this one." The boys didn't move. Unsure what to do or say, she sighed. "I'm not supposed to talk about this, but I don't sell mirrors. I store them for safekeeping." "Like an antique collector?" Otto asked. Grandma watched shows about antique collectors, so he knew the importance of properly storing things like bronze spoons from the 1700s. Mrs. Nedral said, "No, more like a prison warden. Now please go collect that mirror before it gets away." Sheed was totally confused. Mrs. Nedral sounded real upset, and he wanted to help her feel better, so he looked at the spot where he dropped the mirror. A few tiny glittering shards of broken glass remained, though the mirror was now 5 feet from where it had landed. Maybe he'd kicked it aside without knowing it. He strolled over, knelt, reached for it. The mirror slid away from his grasp. "What?" She'd reached again. The mirror flipped like a tossed coin, and where cracked glass should have been, there was a fat green tentacle, tapering down to a tip the width of a carrot and whipping about. The cold, slimy thing grazed Sheed's thumb, causing him to recoil and squeal. He hated tentacles. Unfortunately, when he leaped backwards, he collided with several of the stuck hand mirrors. At his touch, they rained to the ground in quick succession of thunderous cracks. More tentacles sprouted from the shattered surfaces like roots searching for earth. There were 10 or 12 of the thick, octopus-like arms uncoiling from the ornate bronze and silver and gold mirror frames. They hopped about randomly for an instant before twitching with recognition of one another and arranging themselves into 2 even rows. They moved in rhythm like the legs of centipede, but without the actual centipede body, just a bunch of hand mirrors resting on top of a bunch of tentacle stumps that shuffled around the corner together out of sight. A prison break. "Now you've done it," Mrs. Nedral said. Otto, Sheed, and the golden hours were too busy thundering with disgust and holding each other in a group hug to do anything about the tentacle mirror prisoner thingy. "Hurry," Mrs. Nedral said. "You all need to unfreeze me right now." How? Said Sheed, peeling himself from his cousin's embrace. Otto's last deduction bounced around his brain. He and she could unfreeze things, but people weren't things. We can't unstick you, Mrs. Nedral. Mrs. Nedral apparently thought different. She huffed. Of course you can, with the help of the shiny brights over there. The golden hours pointed at themselves. Us? You shinies touch me at the same time as you boys, Mrs. Nedral said. The combination of their strangeness and your not strangeness should reverse the effects of this magical nonsense. Otto, always in need of more information, said, How do you know that? I trap monsters in mirrors. I know a lot of things. Now hop to it. If the legendary Austin boys had learned anything during their many Logan County outings, it was that there was a time to think and a time to do. This was do time. Everyone circled Mrs. Nedral. The golden hours grabbed her shoulders, and she sagged like a puppet whose strings had been cut. When Otto and she touched her too, she rocketed into the air, twisting into a somersault that propelled her clean over the boys' heads. She landed in a crouch, unfrozen and determined, then sprinted after the tentacle mirrors. The boys, their mouths gaping, watched her turn the corner faster than any Fry Flamingo's basketball player. She turned to the golden hours. Did you two know that should work? There was no response. The golden hours were gone, too. Chapter 10. The Highest Court in the Land. No way! She looked left, right, and even up for any sign of the shiny pair. Otto did not help, too busy recording all they had just learned. Entry number 43. AM and PM claim to be clock watchers, agents of time, whatever that means. They appear to be creatures of supernatural origin. Their touch, combined with a touch from me and or she, can unstick a person, permanently freeing them from their frozen state, an ability previously unavailable to us. Deduction: we need to find them and start unfreezing more townspeople. We can use all the help we can get. She jogged off a bit, his eyes flicking down. Otto continued his notations. She clapped his hands. Otto, there's a trail. Otto peeled his eyes from his pad and noticed 2 sets of glittering gold footprints tracing a path from where AM and PM once stood. Easy enough to follow. Get your bike, She'd shouted, already running for his. Grabbing their supplies and stuffing them into Otto's backpack, they darted to where they'd laid their bikes in the street. Mounting them, they pumped the pedals, tracking the golden footprints. It was an easy trail to follow, though AM and PM must have been moving fast because the cousins saw no sign of them. They rode through familiar streets all the way across Fry, past its many frozen residents. The general direction of the track seemed to be taking them to a place they knew well from so many cool football, basketball, and baseball games. Fry High School, home of the Fighting Flamingos. Because it was the high school, it sat at the highest point in town, on top of the hill that rose up like a tent's peak. Riding the bikes up the incline was strenuous work, even for boys who ran everywhere and sometimes jumped for no reason at all. By the time they reached the school, they were both gasping mightily, She'd most of all. The boys couldn't figure any reason why the golden hours would go there. Like their middle school, the high school wouldn't open until tomorrow, if tomorrow ever came. They dropped their bikes in gear, took a moment to catch their breath. She'd removed the length of rope from Otto's bag and hefted it on his shoulder. I'm so tying them up. Maybe we won't have to, said Otto. AM and PM seem nice enough. Before they ran away. If we find them, and we think they're going to run again, we could maybe tackle them, then tie them up, if that makes you happy. The school's front doors weren't locked or even there. They'd been pushed inward with such force that they'd come off the hinges and were simply propped against the walls of the school's main corridor. The golden, sparkly tracks continued inside, but the boys didn't need them. Deep in the heart of the school, they heard a pair of familiar voices screaming, No! Following the sound, the boys moved past rows of lockers until they came to an intersection of hallways. The tracks led in a direction the boys were familiar with, towards the gym where the Fighting Flamingos played all their rivals. A basketball court in the highest building in town was the highest court in the land, She'd once noted when Grandma brought them to a game. She laughed and said he made a fine point there. I'm going to be a fighting flamingo one day, Grandma. You and Otto can watch me hit a bunch of buzzer beaters. Grandma agreed that was an even better point. Otto said she would probably bribe the bench because Otto was a hater sometimes. At the far end of the gym was a big glass trophy case filled with plaques and medals and glossy golden cups commemorating Fry High achievements in sports and academics over the years. In front of the case, staring at the glass, were AM and PM. The golden hours were not looking at the 1979 chess club trophy, but staring at their really not-so-bad reflections, horrified. She'd, irritated, said, "Hey, why'd you two run off like that?" AM said, "We're sorry." PM said, "That was rude." "Dang right it was," she'd said. "We're trying to figure out how to fix time, and you're the only people we've met who knew anything about what's going on." There were many questions to ask, but Otto's deductive mind needed a single curiosity settled. "How'd you get here so fast? We were on bikes and couldn't catch you." AM frowned as if the answer should be obvious. "We already told you we're the golden hours. We're responsible for the best light of the day." PM said, "Wrangling light requires agility and efficiency. In order to properly do our jobs, we must—" She'd, so excited he squealed before speaking, said, "Oh, I know this one. It's light speed. You two can move at light speed, like a starship." AM beamed. "That is absolutely correct." Otto was surprised by Sheed's guess, but mostly because he didn't think of it first. She'd read Otto's face. "What? You thought you were the only one who could deduce stuff? Man, please." Otto rolled his eyes and moved on. "You ever hear of a guy named Mr. Flux?" AM and PM mulled it over. AM said, "No, the name's not familiar." PM added, "We work with everyone who's anyone. If he were someone to know, then we would know him." That was disappointing. If the golden hours didn't have a clue, who did? Otto said, "You're agents of time. You don't have any idea how to fix what happened?" "No," said PM. "That's why we came here, for guidance." The boys glanced around the cavernous space. Schools were places for information and answers and guidance, but was there supposed to be information and answers and guidance about frozen time at Fry High's empty gym? "Have you found any?" She'd asked, skeptical. "No," said AM. "We've yet to visit the library," PM said. "We got distracted by—" She faced the display case, and being greeted by her reflection, she began to scream. "No!" She grabbed her shoulders and gently turned her away from the cruel glass. "Let's go to the library." The golden hours nodded enthusiastically and allowed Otto and Sheed to lead them. Because the boys were middle schoolers still and unfamiliar with the maze-like hallways of Fry High beyond the gym, they relied on handy direction arrows mounted on the walls of each intersection. They took 3 rights, a left, went up 2 flights of stairs, took another right, a left, and 2 more rights before arriving at a set of double doors beneath a big brass library sign. Long before reaching the doors, they had heard a soft rumbling that grew in volume the closer they got. Now, just mere feet from entering, they recognized it as the low roar of many voices speaking at once. Concerned, Otto asked, "Are those your friends in there?" AM and PM replied at the same time. "Some of them." She'd said, "Is this dangerous?" "Oh, no," AM said. "As far as we know, we're indestructible." The boys thought that over a second. Otto pointed at himself, then She'd. "We're not indestructible." PM said, "You may want to be careful then." The golden hours shoved Otto and Sheed into the room.